He knew the minute I stepped from behind the public part into the exhibit part, he came alive. He literally had me backing out of the exhibit on a number of occasions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. I am Priscilla Crawford, the co-coordinator of BioBlitz Oklahoma and a conservation biologist with the Oklahoma Biological Survey. This podcast is an extension of our BioBlitz Oklahoma events. Now we can celebrate Oklahoma's biodiversity with you all year round. In these podcasts, we will chat with our biodiversity experts, answer biodiversity questions, and let you know about biodiversity and community science opportunities that you can join. In this Meet the Expert episode, I chat with my friend Rusty Grimpe, who leads the discovery walks during our fall BioBlitz events. Rusty is a wonderful all-around naturalist, but he also had a fascinating career in zookeeping. Join me as I chat with Rusty. He tells us some fun stories about caring for alligators and turtles, and you can hear his love of natural history from his descriptions of trips to the Galapagos and to his explorations around his home near Skiatook. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. But please forgive the audio quality of Rusty's connection. We recorded his part of the conversation on a cell phone from his rural Osage County home.
My name is Rusty Grimpe, Grimpe. I am retired from a zoo career of over 30 years. I worked for about 5 years at the Oklahoma City Zoo, and then another 27 plus at the Tulsa Zoo, where most of the time I was either in the reptile, herpetology department, aquarium department, or for a few years at the very end at Tulsa, I was in the education department. Also, Oklahoma City, for a while, I was in the hospital isolation. So I covered a large number of species at the time that I was employed. Right now, being retired, I live west of Skiatook out on some acreage. We try and manage it as a natural area, which we were certified. I volunteer at Oxley, where it varies depending on the time of year. I'll lead butterfly walks, do other hikes, educational hikes, also do butterfly counts. I occasionally teach a class. Also, we do eagle watches with the Audubon throughout the winter up on a cove where they have had an eagle watch going on for years and years, like decades, I believe, back when eagles were fairly scarce in Oklahoma. So we're just continuing that string of data.
So you're definitely not one of those retirees that's sitting on the couch and just watching TV.
Way too many hobbies.
Yep. At our BioBlitz Oklahoma events, you have been one of our all-around natural history experts. You lead our popular discovery walks, which have been great for families, people who are new to BioBlitz and are not experts. And on those walks, you cover all sorts of things, from like wasp nests to butterflies to native plants to interesting rocks.
Thoroughly enjoy those walks, and BioBlitz has been just something I look forward to. As far as being an expert in anything, I'm not. You never know. Sometimes I've had groups as small as 5, and other times we've had almost 60, and we had to divide the group up and split it up to other people.
One of the reasons why I started this podcast is I kind of missed interacting with my favorite biologists during BioBlitz, because this year, of course, we're all trying to stay home and stay safe. This podcast is a way so that I can chat with you and share this with the people that would normally be coming to our BioBlitz. I definitely miss our personal interactions that we get to have during our fall event. Do you feel that working and seeing little kids learn about things is one of the most fun things about your participation in BioBlitz?
It's always just a delight to be with the wide variety of people you get. I get some experts in other fields, all the way down to the families that maybe the kids have never even been on a hike before, and they're a little bit tentative to go out in the woods. And I enjoy it all. The recording and documentation of species and stuff is very important, and the fact that the scientists can get together and brainstorm for future projects or whatever, all that's extremely important. But for me, I think the thing that inspires me the most about BioBlitz and also is the most exciting, and I think the most important, is the interaction of the public coming in and being included in scientific stuff. Also the fact that so many of the locals get involved wherever the BioBlitz happens to be. They can learn then what's right in their own backyard, and I've noticed that many of them do not know that. The thing I hear most in my walks with people going, I didn't know that. And to me, that's very important because then they know it now. And it's something that may make them a little bit more interested in what's around them, but also appreciate it more and be more involved with maybe protecting it down the road.
Yeah, for sure. BioBlitz is, I think of it as mostly an outreach activity, our biggest outreach event that we do for the Oklahoma Biological Survey.
Oh, yeah.
The science is important, but I think that actually takes a backseat to the kind of celebration of biodiversity that we're able to have with everybody from the experts like you and professors from different universities, but down to the little kids that come with their families who, like you said, may have never actually gone on a hike before or camped out in the woods for a weekend. The exposure and the outreach, I think, is the most important part for me. And so we're trying to do a little bit of that with this podcast and then our virtual BioBlitz events. Thanks to you and several other experts around the state, we had very small BioBits this fall too, where people could participate in small groups scattered around the state during our normal fall BioBlitz weekend. And you met a group out at Osage Hill State Park, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And again, very enjoyable and very doable for considering the situation. You know, we took a short hike, but we found so many things to look at that it seemed like a long hike.
Yeah.
Because we stopped frequently and looked at things closely. And the longer you look in a spot, the more you see.
Right. And you're the perfect person to lead those walks because you have such a wide range of natural history trivia stored up in your little brain.
Priscilla, the most important word there was little brain or word.
No, you have tons of knowledge up there, and I'm so glad that you have joined our kind of BioBlitz cruise and come and share that with people. But I did want to ask you some questions about what it was like to work in a zoo situation, because I don't really know much about what the zoo career is like and what it is a reptile keeper and the things that you had to do for that job. I suspect you have some good stories about working with animals regularly like that.
We could do a whole program of a number of hours with the stories, these stories, things that have happened or came close to happening and all this kind of stuff.
Things that came close to happening. Oh, that sounds ominous.
Yeah, and it is. The zoo people that were involved, we frequently, when we get together, rehash some of those things. And
Of course.
Yes. When I graduated, I had a BS degree in biology and grew up in El Paso, Texas, so I was a desert rat. When I got out of school, things were tough then too. Right at that time, the economy was bad. I wanted to be like a forest ranger or a wildlife biologist with the government. None of those positions were open, and if they were, people with doctorates were taking them just to get in.
Oh.
I was sort of out on a limb, and a friend of ours said, well, you know, my parents were real good about letting us keep all kinds of critters at home growing up. And this woman was a docent at the Albuquerque Zoo, and she said, you know, Rusty's been sort of a zookeeper all of his younger life. Why didn't he go into zookeeping? So I actually started putting out resumes and stuff to zoos, and I ended up getting a job, actually a temporary job at Oklahoma City, which led to a permanent job, a sort of a dream job in one sense because it was in the herpetarium, and I developed a real taste for reptiles at the time and amphibians. Things have changed tremendously, and so that was early 70s when I got my first job. The amount of knowledge that has been gained about keeping, well, any animal, but we'll talk about reptiles and amphibians, in captivity has just exploded. One thing more and more information is available and more easily available. A lot of it was learning what the natural habitats were really like. So it involved studying geography and maybe microclimates. What do these animals require as far as moisture, substrate, food, lighting, all these things.
So these were all things that you had to figure out as you were taking care of animals. These were things that you had to do research on yourself?
Yes, and not just me, but our whole crews. And what was interesting, another big progression that I noticed over the years was early on. It was amazing if somebody even bred a snake species, like something common like a corn snake. Somebody had some reproduction occur and they got some hatchlings. Oh, back then, a lot of times zoos were sort of closed mouth because they wanted the glory and they didn't want anybody else to know what they'd done to get it to happen.
Oh.
Very quickly over the years, where we all started comparing notes, trading information, and things exploded again on all fronts, not only in the care. And if you take great care of something, of course, you have a better chance of having them reproduce. Clear up to like today, very few animals are taken from the wild, which back in the 70s, most animals were taken from the wild.
Right.
So I think that was a huge step forward. It has just progressed beyond anything I could have imagined when I first started out. The job itself, not only learning about the animal and how to keep it properly, but we had to design exhibits that would not only fit the animal's needs, but also make it to where it was on display, but also where it felt secure. It needed hiding places, but it needed hiding places where the public could still see it, because that was part of it too, your educational part of it and your display part of it for the public.
Right.
That's why you were there.
Well, I feel like zoos have really changed over the last 40 years. Public perception, maybe when I was a kid, it was maybe zoos weren't so great. They were keeping things in cages and, like you said, collecting from the wild, and conservation-wise, it wasn't such a great practice. I feel like that's really changed, and you probably saw that.
Exactly.
Conservation work change from the 70s to currently, right?
Very much so. Many zoos are involved in many conservation efforts, and it's not just breeding a species or something in captivity. They're sending money, they're sending researchers, equipment, all that stuff into the field all over the world, maybe for certain habitats, maybe for a certain species that's endangered or critically in trouble. There have been some situations where animals were brought in and bred in captivity, like the black-footed ferret.
Oh, yeah.
Was considered extinct or was extinct in the wild, and it was zoos that bred them in captivity. You might learn that certain animals have to have a cooling period or a brumation. Some need a change, definitely need their change in the photoperiod.
So photoperiod affects reproduction?
It can with some species, yes.
Oh, just like plants.
You know that old pineal eye on the top of lizards' heads?
Yeah.
They don't actually see with that, but it does take in light. The amount of light, the length of day and stuff can trigger reproductive activity.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that about reptiles.
And each species is different. And then also temperature is what controls the sex of many reptiles.
I did know that. Yeah, like the temperature that the eggs incubate at.
Yeah. They've learned a lot about that. So let's say you have an endangered species and you need to get more of them on the ground. You can control your temperature and get many more females than males and increase that reproduction rate and get some more animals in the population. One of our big ones was when we had a chance to do giant tortoises at the Tulsa Zoo. So many zoos had Galapagos tortoises. We decided to do the aldabra, the other giant tortoise. We got some specimens. We actually got one old male that was had been in captivity for many years. And then we actually got in some animals. We traded a giraffe, ostriches, and so much money to get 3 aldabra tortoises.
I didn't realize zoos had a barter system like that.
We do, and more so now than ever before. There's not that much selling anymore. It's trading and loan.
You've interacted with many species on a very personal level working at a zoo. What have been some of your favorite species to learn about and interact with? Well, I think a lot of people don't realize that reptiles and herps in general can have personalities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of my all-time favorites was our big bull alligator at Tulsa. This guy, he'd been there since 1960. There was no record other than the date that he came in, so we didn't know much about him. For me, he was in this exhibit, and he just was pretty much like people think, they just lay around and do nothing all day, except he knew the minute I stepped from behind the public part into the exhibit part, he came alive. He literally had me backing out of the exhibit on a number of occasions. And what was sort of fun is the pool, the water was clear. He assumed it wasn't. He assumed he was in the swamps of the Everglades.
And that you couldn't see him?
Yeah, he would see me at the other end, let's say on the bank, and he would sneak along the bottom of the pool, and he'd come over right to where I was and sneak right up and just keep his nose right below the water, and then all of a sudden just burst out of the water with his mouth open and scare me good. Those are the kinds of things that, you just never forget, and I loved him. He was just terrific.
Did you often bring food to him?
Actually, it was more territorial, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Stay out of my territory. We fed him in the same spot, and this would happen regardless of where I was in the exhibit. Oh, like our big Aldabra tortoises, they quickly learn that you do bring them food, and here they come, and their necks are stretched out. They'll stand there, and you can scratch their neck, and they stretch out. They stand full height. Uh-huh. They'll stretch their neck up as far as they can. You can just scrub on their neck, and they'll shut their eyes. And part of that is because birds will come up and start grooming them, right. And they want to expose as much of their tissues, their soft tissues, as possible so the birds can get ticks and parasites off of them. So we were sort of the bird surrogate there. Yes, definitely personalities. Chameleons, incredibly smart. Monitors, all these animals, you swear. The hardest part, I think, of the job was finding people smarter than the animals.
Yeah.
Me included.
So did you have ones that try to escape regularly? Yes,
many. Especially, let's say, snakes you had to be extremely careful of because they could fit through such small gaps or openings.
Because they don't have hips or shoulders.
No, and they can push on things. You always made sure that lids or whatever were weighted down or strapped down. That was a major thing, was to make sure that cages, and this was for any zoo animal, that cages were escape-proof.
So you also mentioned that you worked in the education department towards the end of your zoo career.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you do in that capacity?
This was, the very end of my career at Tulsa. I just felt at the time I needed maybe something a little bit different and new. I'd been doing the reptile, the animal end of it for so many years. We had actually gone more and more towards education, even in the reptile department. We realized that was so incredibly important. And we would go out, and my crew I couldn't applaud them more. They would go out on their days off and give talks to organizations and school classes, take animals. We had some animals that we could take and travel with, some snakes. And it was usually snake. People wanted snake programs. And snakes were always such an underdog that we felt that we could do a lot by getting out there. Like when we fed, you could hear people's comments and so many wrong comments. And we would go out right after we'd feed things and talk to people and explain what was going on and just interact with the public as much as possible. So I was already sort of getting into that education mode, and that position opened. The head of the education department, a person before me, retired, and they had done massive amount of work setting the programs up. I got the position, and I went in there, and I know the first day or two, we only had a crew of 3, and yet we had 150 volunteers.
That's a lot to organize.
And tons and tons and tons of programs. And I sat them down. I said, so tell me exactly everything you do in a year's time. And after they were done, it was like, what have I done? What have I gotten myself into? I enjoyed the education part of it just as much as the animal part of it. For me, the most fun and maybe rewarding was we had one whole wing of the education building. So we made that we called it Nature's Attic. We had a sign over the top of the door, and we filled it with everything you could imagine. We had so many biofacts. People donated stuff. We had one of our docents was a taxidermist, and Sutton Aviary gave us a ton of birds they had in freezers from window hits that people brought in. We did a million things in there, and most of it was all touchable.
Oh, cool.
One of them was a big room we could divide in half. We turned that into the Oklahoma room. See, you'll love this part. You traveled from the eastern part of Oklahoma, say the southeastern or eastern side of Oklahoma, all the way to the Panhandle. As you walked through this room, and we had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of things to look at and touch.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We had aquariums. We had everything from an amphiuma to a stream exhibit, from like, say, Locust Grove type stream, Snake Creek, whatever, and then clear out to where we had pupfish in one tank in the western end, and just all kinds of stuff about Oklahoma. We had a bison store, all the parts of a bison. We got bison pelt from the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. They had to euthanize a bison, and we had this pelt prepared. And fourth grade classes in Oklahoma study Oklahoma natural history.
Oh, mm-hmm.
There was the option of teachers could bring their class and do a whole whatever on Oklahoma. Yeah, and after you did inside, you went outside, and we had the outside area. We had an Oklahoma Trail, and it was the plants. Starting in the Panhandle, we had choyas, we had yucca, we had that stuff. It went clear down to where we had bald cypress by a pond.
That's one thing I didn't realize when I moved to Oklahoma decades ago now, how diverse Oklahoma is. And that's my big emphasis through BioBlitz is how diverse we are, our 12 ecoregions, all the way from Gulf coastal sloughs in the southeastern part of the state to like mesas up in the Panhandle, getting out and about and or even just going to the zoo like you've shown them in your Discovery Center, that things can be really varied just across the state.
I totally agree with you. When I moved here from Texas, all I could think about was, whenever I get a chance, I'm going to move back out to the desert. I love Tucson and all that. And the longer I lived here, the more I liked Oklahoma. I love the prairie and the cross timbers and the diversity, which, again, I had no idea existed here until the longer I was here. What we have here is just amazing compared to many other states.
Right. Yeah, just even Kansas, they're the one north of us. They don't have the diversity we have because we go so far south to so far west.
Yeah, and elevation change is amazing.
Yes, and the whole precipitation and temperature gradient. And we're pretty lucky in Oklahoma that we still have quite a bit of natural area. It's not all cropland. So I grew up in Indiana, which is now mostly corn and soybean fields, because it was fertile cropland. But here, the majority of the land is still in relatively natural state. It's not a plowed monoculture. It's, pasture land.
We have 90 acres of pretty decent grassland where we're fighting, some invasion.
On your personal property?
Yeah, on my personal property. But we look at some of these parks and stuff in some of these states like Iowa or Illinois. They have a prairie preserve, and it's maybe 30-some acres. That's all it is. And, you look, and it's like, God, it's just nothing.
Yep, it's so small.
And so, yes, we are lucky in the fact that we have lots of open areas still.
So you grew up in El Paso, kind of in the desert, and then now you are and you have been in Oklahoma for years and years, and you've been able to explore the state. So what's one of your favorite places in Oklahoma, or your favorite place in Oklahoma to explore outside, given our wide variety of terrain and natural habitats?
Well, I really enjoy any place I haven't been to yet. Any new place is definitely a place to explore.
That's an excellent answer.
And you always find something new. But even your old places, you always find something new. Being a desert person, I certainly enjoy going out to Black Mesa because it gives me a fix of being back in the desert. If I had to just pick where I want to go, I would probably say, I would think right off the bat Black Mesa, but I think I'd go with Wichita's.
Well, at least it's quicker to get.
Yeah, much quicker. And then I also threw out there that one of my favorite places is right here at home. I can do the same thing. I can go out and walk the property and find something new all the time, or something I'd not seen before. Find an animal doing something interesting, or a plant that's blooming, and every once in a while I find a plant I hadn't seen yet. That's a toughie to give you a definite answer.
Well, having a wide variety of answers is also an answer. Sometimes you just can't pick one favorite. Growing up in El Paso, you kind of hinted at you kept a lot of animals in your bedroom and why that made you a good zoo candidate. Guess you were always like stomping around out in the desert amongst the cacti and grasses when you were growing up. Is that when you knew that you were interested in handling animals and doing biology and things like that?
From the very start, my parents said they don't know where I got it from. They both liked the outdoors and all that, but they were never like animal crazy. My dad was an avid gardener, vegetable gardener, so he was always out. They said from the time I was a little tyke, I was out there helping him plant seeds or following him, picking up the seeds that he had just planted. I can give you a couple of experiences of being when I was very young. So I was born in Chicago, but they moved and I was at a very early age, they moved to El Paso. So quite a culture shock for them.
Uh-huh. Why did they move?
Actually, it was because of me. I had pretty tough asthma as a little kid. And being in Chicago, wet, cold, the doctor suggested that they move to a dry desert climate. And it turned out we had relatives in El Paso.
Oh.
So that gave them a foothold. Went down, my dad got a job there, and my parents moved down there. I was already crazy about bugs. They said from the time I could walk, I was picking up bugs and doing all kinds of stuff. They went down to El Paso the year before they moved down there, so I must have been 3 or 4. While they were down there finding out where to live and all that, they went to the El Paso Zoo, and at that time the zoo had a snake pit, the old tiny snake pit.
Yeah.
Pile of rocks, and there were all kinds of rattlesnakes and stuff, and this guy walking around with his snake hook and these high boots on, doing demonstrations. They sat me up on this wall, and this guy started talking to us, and there was a horned lizard sitting out on one of these rocks. And I was just totally fascinated by that. And he brought it over and let me hold it. Actually, it got worse because this is totally wrong. But at the time, this is what hooked me. He let me take it.
Oh, my gosh.
And we went back to Chicago on the train with me holding a horned lizard in a shoebox on my lap. My dad set up a pen, by an anthill there in the yard and all that. And, of course, it did fine in the summer, but, of course, it died in the winter. So we did something bad then, but we were ignorant. But I was hooked. And then when we moved to El Paso, my first friend had box turtles. Boy, oh boy, I've been a turtle nut ever since.
Now you raise them now, right? Like different kinds of turtles.
I had, of course, growing up, I had a lot of box turtles in the backyard. And we had great rock walls, so that it was almost like big outdoor exhibits. And we had
cool.
box turtles hatching and everything, but yeah, I got into tortoises. I had tortoises for years from Africa and India and South America. I still have a few star tortoises. I've actually gotten rid of most of my animals just because I just don't want to do it quite to that extent anymore. And there's so many young people that are where I was. They are so interested in maintaining some of these exotic species. And so I still have some of my star tortoises, which at one point, this was sort of interesting. I had hatched more star tortoises, which is a beautiful tortoise from India. I had hatched more star tortoises, more than anybody else in the whole Western Hemisphere. And that was only like maybe 15. But I remember some guy that was an expert on just, going, "You've done better than anybody else, blah, blah." Well, there's tons of them now and lots of people raising them. I understand the thing of animals in captivity, maybe the pros and the cons, but so many of these animals were already here, and you can't just take them out and release them. My female star tortoise that I got, a lady had 11 years before I got her, back in the 70s, and she had brought her from India in a suitcase from her vacation. That's how lax, how lax things were back in those days.
we are down to our quick question round. These are some questions I have, are kind of quick and fun, and you can answer them really quickly, or you can take as much time to explain your answer and talk about it as you want. What has been the most exciting organism that you have seen in the wild?
There again, it'd be very hard to pick one, but I can give you just a couple of examples. They'll be quick. So I got to go to the Galapagos Islands one time, which everything over there is amazing to see.
Uh-huh.
We were in a small ship or boat. I happened to see an orca surface right by the boat, which is, an orca is unusual around the Galapagos. And our guide, who was a biologist, couldn't believe it. He's like, hurry, hurry, hurry. And the two of us that were up on top ran down. They got in the little skiff with the driver. So there were four of us in this sort of it wasn't rubberized, but it was extremely low, little tiny boat. And we followed this orca. And at first we followed it, and then it slowed down, and it sort of followed us then. And it came up literally right next to the boat and just stopped and just drifted there. We could have reached down and touched it.
Whoa.
That was pretty amazing. And then, other things like Amy from Oxley one time was out here, and she looked under the shrub and found a good-sized copperhead, but it was eating a legless lizard that was about as big as it was. Those kinds of things just mesmerize me, and I never get tired of seeing a dung beetle roll a ball of dung. So how's that?
That's great. Well, sometimes I get really excited about, I don't know, even seeing the juncos arrive in my backyard. They just arrived a couple weeks ago, and I was like, woohoo, the juncos are back.
Yes.
And, the first couple days, there's just one, and then the next cold wave comes through, and you get 3 or 4. I get excited about really common things as well. And, the last time I saw a dung beetle rolling a ball of dung, I actually stopped to take a little video. So you're not alone.
And I've done the same thing.
The Galapagos is kind of on most people's kind of natural history bucket list. So you've already hit one of those major locations. What other kind of locations is on your bucket list for visiting for natural history, or seeing the animals, or checking out ecoregions?
Well, on my list, probably near the top would be Costa Rica as far as a foreign place, just because they seem to be a country that's, they have such a high percentage of land that's put away for preservation or conservation and parks. I haven't been in the rainforest too much. I've been up to our northwest a couple of times, but I'd like to spend more time up there. I was in the Olympic National Forest for a very short period of time, and I'd love to go back and spend some quality time there. And I've never actually been all the way up to our northeast, like Maine.
Okay, next quick question, or relatively quick question. What advice would you give to someone wanting to work at a zoo?
I would say, first of all, just be a sponge and soak up everything in all aspects of life and living. Good education. You may think you won't use it. You do use parts of it that you just never think you're going to. Also, zoo positions and stuff have become extremely competitive in many parts of the country, whereas when I applied in the early 70s, I was one of the few people with a degree and got in. Now, lots of zookeepers have masters, and some to progress. A lot of places like zoo directors, they're doctorates. Don't neglect your education. And I would also say, though, don't become so specialized that you don't see everything else. I've had people ask me, young people ask me, I want to be a herpetologist. I want to take herpetology in college. And I usually tell them, take all your other courses, all your other biology courses, all that. You can take a herpetology class, but don't specialize until you're much, if you're going to go for master's or doctorate, whatever. I just found that with all the things we did, it was so important to have all kinds of, let's say, talents rather than just knowing one thing. Can we do a little divergent thing here?
Sure.
This has to do with zoo and getting a job at the zoo. So my story, I love this story. You never know who you'll impress. Early on, one of the guys that worked there asked if he could bring a couple of young people through, and would I give a tour behind the scenes? And I said, sure. We did that pretty frequently. They were probably anywhere from 11 to 13 years old. He brought two boys. We toured them all around. We let them hold a snake. We told them all the things we did and all this. I remember the situation, but I didn't remember the kids. So years later, I come out of my office and I'm in the hallway, public hallway, getting a drink at the drinking fountain. And this big, tall, gangly guy comes up behind me and he said, "Excuse me, sir, but you don't know me, but I've stalked you for years." And I was like, okay, what's this all about? And anyway, then he told me he was one of those two kids. He said that ever since that day of me showing him around, he had wanted to be a herpetologist. And so he geared everything up towards that. It turned out that day we had just gotten word that for the first time ever, we were going to get to hire a part-time person for the summer. So I asked him, I said, would you be interested in a part-time summer job? Because it was early spring. Oh, yeah. I said, well, come back tomorrow and we'll interview you. And we did, and we hired him. And that tall, gangly young man turned out to be Aaron Goodwin.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, haha. Who is also one of our BioBlitz experts. Yes. And a great herpetologist and a great invertebrate person. And he's getting way into the native plants, and he's a great teacher. Oh, that's such a nice story. Yeah, and I think it's really important for the people like us in the positions we have now to realize that we can have kind of such an influential impact on young people.
You never know when it's going to happen or with what, and it can be the slightest little thing.
Mm-hmm.
You make a connection. Sometimes that you don't realize.
Okay, so you're retired and you've been able to spend a lot of time doing things that aren't necessarily things you have to make money for. And you've been able to kind of spend time learning about lots of different things. What's the next thing that you want to learn about?
Right around here, what I realize, I'm always going, God, what is that? Are bees. I've gone from reptiles, amphibians. Fish was another biggie of mine when I was young, still is. And then I went to butterflies, and I've got, birds, but bees, and we have a lot of pollinator-friendly plants up here, and I see so many species of bees, and I'm going, I wonder what that is. So that's one thing on my list.
Yeah, native bees are on my list, too, of things that I've been trying to learn. And I spent a lot of time during this pandemic summer watching bees and taking pictures of bees. And I think I've learned some of the big groups, so now I can say, oh, that's a leafcutter bee, or oh, that's a American bumblebee. And,
very cool.
And that sort of thing. But I haven't tried to catch them and like really get the nitty gritty down to species.
I haven't either. Another thing that I would like to learn that I used to see my grandmother and great aunt do, and they were experts at it, used to go down in their basement and the walls were lined with all kinds of canned goods, in jars, have a garden, and sometimes they have excess. And right now I freeze everything, but I would love to learn how to prepare other things. They would make their own, tomato sauce. They would make their own pickle relish. They would make all these things and have just jars and jars and jars of stuff. And they were just incredible. And of course they had all the equipment, and I have some of that equipment that they had. So I'd like to be able to use some of their stuff. And you mentioned art. So when the house was built up here on this property, they brought in some fill dirt that they were digging a pond on a neighbor's property, and there was all this fill dirt that they used to level the lot. And in that dirt was all these fairly flat pieces of sandstone. And some of them have fossils or imprints of fossils in them, and a lot of different textures and stuff. And I started picking those up and cleaning them off, and I ended up putting a tree that's about 8 foot tall. I've got two of them now, actually, on the wall, branches that come out, and even some little burned area in one that I used some black flint. Painted it first to make sure it's what I wanted, the shape and all that. Drew it with a pencil. And then I glued all these pieces of rock like a puzzle on there. So it sort of looks like bark. It looks like bark. And I enjoyed doing that. So something like that, I like doing stuff with my hand.
So I've started trying to keep kind of a nature journal where I do little nature sketches, and then I write down things about what organisms I see that day or what's blooming at the time that I do my little journal. I'm not very consistent at it, and I'm kind of disappointed that I'm not more consistent with my nature journal and writing down my observations. Every time we talk, it seems like you're telling me cool things that you're seeing on your property. Last time we chatted to prepare for our discussion today, you talked about seeing pine siskins coming to the sunflowers and the rattlesnake that went across your porch. Do you record your observations anywhere? Do you have a journal, or do you?
Yeah.
So you keep a journal? Are you consistent about it?
Actually, amazingly consistent. I didn't think it would happen when we started. Moved up here in 2010 and have kept it going till the present day. I actually was writing in it this morning. So what I've done, big spiral notebooks, we're already into our second big spiral notebook, and each day has a day's date. So like you have January 1st. And then as you go down that page, it's 2010, what we saw. It's 2011, what we saw. November 13th, I put down the weather conditions briefly, and then I've put down what I've seen so far. And we also put in any observations that are we think are interesting or we have time to write down. I can go back then and just look right up the page and see everything else we saw on that date, clear back for 10 years. What I think over the years has been most impressive to me is that we can find like you were talking about, the first junco showed up. Well, many times the first junco showed up within sometimes a few days of the first junco that showed up the year before or the year before. And how consistent some of these patterns are, or occasionally this year, very inconsistent. And I don't know if it was our weather or what, but things weren't quite as in tune. And we put what flowers are blooming or seeding, what berries the birds are eating. Sundays we have much more time to put down more things.
So do you have any suggestions on how, or tips or tricks on how to encourage me to be more consistent?
Well, I think a lot of it is that you're just not busy enough. You have so many sticks in the fire. I can't imagine you keeping anything up like that.
Oh, that's my own fault. I keep coming up with new projects for myself. And I think even when I retire, I think even when I retire, I'm not going to have time to do half the projects I have started now.
Isn't that great though?
I really enjoy participating in the Project Feeder Watch. You've probably heard about it. It's out of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's a winter citizen science project where you record birds that you see at your feeders a couple days a week. I'm relatively consistent with participating. I think this will be my 8th year. That motivates me because I know I'm putting it into a database, and it's fun to see, we have 2 titmice this weekend, or, we had 45 house sparrows come to the feeders. To describe for the audience, you were kind of on the edge of the cross timbers, surrounded by tallgrass prairie.
The southern part of the property is cross timbers, forested, and then the north part is tallgrass prairie, and it's sort of up on a hill, so where the house is situated can look out over the whole property. We see a lot of goings on, raptors and what have you fly, and right now the harriers are in, skimming over the prairie, and black vultures. We don't see black vultures all summer, but they're back. They come in the winter. We're seeing those. And the meadowlarks are grouping up, and usually in the evening, right towards sunset, they come flying in from all over, and they land in some of our sumac groves and sit for a little bit, And of course, the sun is about setting so that the gold color on them is just brilliant. And then they fly off and they land into the prairie just south of the house for the night. If you get up early enough in the morning, you'll see them rising up and heading out probably to go feed. So all that stuff's just great.
It is just great. And I can see why you have become one of the most popular BioBlitz activity leaders, because you have such a wide range of knowledge, from reptiles to birds to plants and rocks.
Well, you're far too kind, but
oh, hush. It's
one of those things that I think it's just something that was in my makeup, that I was always interested in living things, or non-living things, but natural history and habitats and just getting out and looking, and it just sort of sinks in and stays there.
Well, I'm so glad that we found you and include you now in BioBlitz, and I really appreciate you taking the time today to chat for our podcast and sharing your experience and your love of nature with us. I loved all your stories, and as always, I enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks, Rusty, for participating in this fledgling podcast and for all of your years of working with us during BioBlitz. And maybe next year in 2021, we can all get together again and share our love of nature in person.
Oh, I sure hope so. And thank you for finding me. I've enjoyed all of it.
Well, thanks. And thanks to everyone who listened to our new BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. We have several more Meet the Expert episodes lined up for you in the coming weeks. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen so that you are notified when we upload more new episodes. You can also stay up to date on our Facebook page, BioBlitz Oklahoma, and on Twitter at OKBioBlitz, and on our website, biosurvey.ou.edu/BioBlitzOK. Don't worry, all these will be in the show notes for your reference. My BioBlitz co-coordinator and Sequoia State Park naturalist, Angelina Stan-Campiano, and I are also working together on Ask the Expert episodes. Do you have a burning question about Oklahoma's biota? Curious about some natural history phenomena that you've observed? Send us your questions and we will work on answering them in future Ask the Expert episodes. You can send Facebook messages, tweet at us, or simply email your questions to me at prill@ou.edu. That's PRILL@ou.edu. We will also be happy to receive suggestions for future expert interviews and community science projects to highlight. Well, that wraps up this episode. Thanks again to Rusty Grimpe for joining me on Meet the Experts. He's one of my favorite and most knowledgeable naturalists that I know. This podcast is a project of BioBlitz Oklahoma, an outreach program of the Oklahoma Biological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. We hope that you have time to step outside today and explore Oklahoma's amazing biodiversity. Remember, you can find biodiversity right outside your own door.